I'm Neal Romanek. I'm the editorial director at The Flint, and we cover sustainability in the media and entertainment industry from script to distribution. And today we're going to be talking about cloud and cloud production. And I've got with me Berny Carpenter from Solid State Logic and Ahmed Shalabi from Audinate. And they're going to be talking a bit about the audio and sound side of live cloud production, but we're also going to get into cloud production generally and what that is and why is that a good thing and when should we use cloud for live production and why aren't we using it all the time. So anyway, maybe just start with a little introduction. Tell us a bit, Bernie, about Solid State.
So yeah, I'm Berny Carpenter, the broadcast product manager at Solid State Logic. So Solid State Logic manufacture audio consoles for a wide range of applications, whether that's live sound, studio-based, and we also have a large focus on broadcast, which is where I fit in.
Amazing.
I'm Ahmed Shalabi. I'm a senior design consultant for Audinate. Audinate develops chips and software stacks that enable you to transport audio over an IP network.
It's very simply put. And we have some Audinate or some Dante training going on downstairs, right?
Yes, that's correct. So we have Dante training level 1 and 2 downstairs. So if you guys would like some training, definitely check it out.
Is anybody doing the Dante training? Or is it? Yep, amazing. I have absolutely no professional use for the Dante training, but I'm still interested. I feel like I would like to go down there and add that to
There's also on-demand training, so you can do it at your own pace online.
Oh, amazing. Okay, good. So let's talk about maybe cloud production, just kind of from the start. I mean, what is production in the cloud? What does actually that mean? I mean, from when I come to it, without knowing anything about it, I assume that means doing something on a browser instead of, with a bunch of hardware in a broadcast center. What does it mean actually when we talk about doing something in the cloud?
So one of the key factors really, if you walk into a traditional broadcast studio, you'll see racks of equipment. And a lot of this equipment is proprietary. It's doing a specific job that will have one purpose. One of the things that we're looking at is whether we can take some of those proprietary bits of processing and run them on shared infrastructure, shared computing infrastructure. So in our case, the audio console, that means that the DSP processing can be done on an off-the-shelf cloud provision server. One of the advantages that you get from this is that you can then, rather than needing to invest in a hardware platform, you have the ability to go and rent this infrastructure as and when you need it, deploy the amount that you need, turn it on when you start, turn it off when you've finished, and you don't have to manage that infrastructure permanently.
Yeah.
Well, just to add a couple of points on what Bernie already said. It's a more cost-effective way. That's number one, of course, and it allows you to have virtually endless possibilities because you're really using as little as you want or as much as you want. You're not bound by the physical hardware that you already bought. You're not bound by any limitations. The compute power and the processing power is virtually infinite.
So that sounds amazing. Virtually infinite sounds really cool.
Virtually infinite.
But if I'm a broadcaster and I'm used to doing things in a certain way, and I've got my setup that has been working fine for years, and also I've employed people to do those specific jobs, and they've learned to do them in a specific way. How should I think about building cloud into that? Because it sounds sort of scary. It's like, am I talking about rethinking everything I do, or how can I start sort of folding that in? And also maybe what makes me want to do that in the first place?
I think it's always important to have an application when you start thinking about the technology you might want to use for something. You have to have an end goal in mind. You have to have a task that you're trying to achieve. in the case of cloud production, and specifically with audio and broadcast in general, the personnel involved from a production point of view might well remain exactly the same as with a traditional production. You still have an audio operator who is still going to be sat in front of some faders. The difference comes in where the maths is happening. What the processing engine is no longer this dedicated box. The processing happens in the cloud alongside the rest of the broadcast production, the video production, the other audio parts that might need to be going on. So it's a case of when you're looking at deploying a production, looking at the technologies that are available, and I think we have proved alongside Audinate with their product that the infrastructure is there to deploy and successfully do a cloud-based audio, large-scale cloud-based production today.
So is the audio, what I think of like doing audio in the cloud, is that quite separate from video? And I feel like, obviously with Dante, who's been around for a while, is that in any way more mature or more developed than just maybe because you're not moving as much data around as video production in the cloud? Or are they pretty much on parallel tracks?
I think the technology, when it comes to audio and video, are moving at different paces right now. Sometimes audio is overlooked. Oftentimes audio is overlooked until it doesn't work.
Yeah.
So, but there are several technologies like now, not just ours, that is slowly migrating to the cloud. And I think from a cloud production perspective, it's becoming more mature now as we speak.
And then, so how have you seen it, like, with your customers? What kind of adoption have you seen, and so maybe what kind of case studies? Just, I guess so people can get an idea of like how practically it's working in terms of broadcasters moving to the cloud. Like, what kinds of things are they asking you, and what kind of things are they doing?
We've done a number of case studies or proof of concept tests, and it's a good question. I think there's one example of a UK-based broadcaster doing trialing out the process for a daytime talk show to see operationally. They wanted to see, can they do it? Is the process the same for the team on the ground making the show? Do they notice a difference? And the short answer is no, they don't. Like there are things that you have to consider. Latency when it comes to audio is one, but there are ways to adapt and work with the technology that you have. And we very successfully proved in this specific UK example of the audio operator was sat there in front of a large-scale console surface. They didn't know, really, they couldn't tell that the processing was happening in a data center, in an AWS data center, physically a long way away from where they were. The process is the same. And that's one of the key questions that broadcasters have, and they want to understand how or if their workflows would change. Another consideration is that it opens up the possibility of doing things in a much more distributed manner. You don't need everyone to be in physically the same location, whether that means the production is happening in one facility while the program, the filming, the sports event is somewhere else. It might be like that. Or you might have a distributed team where your audio mixer is in one city, your vision mixer could be somewhere entirely different.
I think the same, yes. We have been involved in several POCs here in the UK and in the US. I see the adoption more across the Atlantic, to be honest, more than Europe here. Maybe that could be driven by the cost or the type of infrastructure and the type of teams that are available in the US. But the focus seems to be sustainability, driving costs down, and having globally distributed teams. That seems to be the focus from an adoption perspective.
And so sustainability, that's what we specialize in the Flint. And sustainability is I mean, everybody has a sustainability story, and it's kind of part of everything that we do, or there needs to be part of everything that we do. So you mentioned a couple things that sound like they could be helpful in contributing to sustainability, not having to move people around as much. Is that is that something you think about kind of going forward, and how you think about productions, and are there opportunities there to kind of really rethink how we do things?
I think that is a key consideration for a number of broadcasters is the environmental impact travel has, and whether that's the moving of people. A whole production team historically with an OB might have had to go and meet at a location. It could be a large amount of travel, especially in somewhere like the US, where obviously there's a much wider geographic scale. But equally the equipment. If you're having to drive large trucks great distances, not only does that have an impact of itself, but when the truck is travelling, it can't be doing something else. It's going to an event. Whereas with the cloud-based version of this, if you can connect to that from somewhere, there is no travel for the cloud aspect, so it's a very different scenario.
So yes, that would make sense if, like, the U.S. or Australia or something where you've got, you're having broadcasters that are really having to move. If there's a production in another part of the state, it's a long trip to get there. So being able to do things in a distributed way. Does that also affect the how people work? I think that's another thing too. Is just that what your workday looks like when you're doing something in the cloud versus. I mean, you said people really wouldn't be able to tell the difference. If they're using a surface that's operating in the cloud versus on-prem, but the bigger sense, can that change the way people actually work, the way people kind of show up at work?
It can certainly, if they take the travel element out, it can mean that they can do more. It might be that they can cover 2 football games on one day instead of having to travel, do one game and travel back. So there's that's one area where you see an immediate difference. Another area, the cloud offers the opportunity to automate the infrastructure that people are using. So obviously there is a lot of complex technology underneath, but more and more of it can be scripted. So there are teams of broadcast specialists who can deploy this, and we as a manufacturer can deploy our systems automatically, meaning that you can have this equipment ready to go very, very quickly in an automated fashion compared to some of the more traditional workflows.
I think just to add to Bernie's point, this typical workflow means that there are new technologies that broadcasters have to learn. There are different workflows, and from the network world and from the IT world, the broadcasters have to adopt to be able to migrate successfully to cloud, and that might be concern for some people, but it does drive the teams to work differently. So you're able now to have distributed teams. You don't have to have those big facilities. You don't have to have that much labor. They don't have to be present at the venue. You're not bound by the limitations of a specific geographical location. You're able to do this in a much more flexible manner.
So it really, if you're doing things in the cloud, it really has the potential to sort of shake up how you work or shake up how broadcast is done. And we hope in a positive, but maybe that may upset some people as well if you're really able to rethink everything.
I think that's right. I think it provides the opportunity for broadcasters to cover more events, and there's a drive everywhere for more content, and it allows them to do that in a sustainable way rather than having to invest in a large hardware infrastructure. It gives them the flexibility to deploy this when they need it. If they need a small number of additional studios or one additional studio to cover an extra event, they can do that through this software-based approach, utilizing processing that they rent rather than own.
And so are you talking to your customers about kind of that evolution and that kind of making that transition? Because I'm sure that's something that there probably needs some hand holding and some education and some like, it's okay, keep going, we're with you, in order to make that transition, because it's not necessarily something that people are used to, like how they adopt that.
Yeah, that's right. And I think there are a number of at the end of the day, the work that we do, we're driven by our customers' needs. What they are hoping to achieve, we will work with them to provide the technology that allows them to do that. So it's a very close relationship with the key customers who are doing this already today and those who are looking to do it in the future to make sure they've got the technology to deliver those.
Yeah, what do you? Because there's that people are, they see a new technology or change is coming. There can be sort of that anxiety, and how am I going to be able to manage this change, and do I just have to figure it out myself?
We've seen it, and we've seen it when we moved from analog to digital, and we're going to continue to see it. I think working in such industry, we're driven by technology, and we always have to adapt to a constantly changing target. So I think the faster you adapt, the better you'll be able to provide better content, and you will continue to grow. From our perspective, we try to invest as much as possible in educating our customers, whether that's through training in shows like this, like we have right now, or online training, or we go to demonstrate our products and train people on how to have a successful workflow.
And there will be sessions later on about sort of training and kind of getting people up to speed. Is there an opportunity for kind of newer people coming into the industry? Because I know that's an issue. Is like, where are these new people going to come from into the industry? What's the next generation going to be like? Is there opportunity for them to come in and learn this thing in a way that maybe is difficult for somebody who's been sitting in front of a
I think the people who are just coming into the industry, they are in a much better position because they might not have the preconceived ideas of yesterday, or maybe they are transitioning from a different industry to this one. There's so much content to learn, cloud technologies, networks, and so on. There's so much content, and it's completely accessible and free. So really, it's just picking the right channel, the right platform, the right resource, and having the drive and discipline to be able to build, learn from your mistakes, and adapt and grow. It's simple as that.
So, speaking of education, you do have the opportunity here to ask these guys questions. So, any questions at all? Raise a hand. At any point, just jump in. I could do one of those really long, uncomfortable silences, and then people will be like, "You do it. You say something." Okay, at any time. So, what about? I know we had talked before, when we'd spoken earlier about that idea of being able to scale things, and I know with that that production you were talking about earlier, that there can be issues, or not issues, but questions. If I'm a broadcaster, like, is this going to be sufficient for, this is a really important broadcast. Am I going to be able to scale things up in a way that I'm going to need to for this, big show or whatever it is, or something that's got a lot of inputs? How do you address questions about, is this thing going to fall over, and what are the limits that I can push it to?
It's a good question, and Solid State Logic made large format consoles. We made large analog consoles, large traditional digital consoles. So in the broadcast domain, with our cloud-based processing, we have taken the technology that we had, which was CPU-based processing already. So we were already in a very good place when it came to moving to the cloud, and we have deployed this as a Linux service to provide us up to 256 channels of processing. So it is a large-scale platform that meets the requirements of the vast majority of traditional on-the-ground large shows. I mean, we can go even larger, and we'll go larger in the future. But it's already a large-scale platform, and that's where the Dante Connect technology is coming as well. So we've implemented the Dante Connect SDK inside our processing engine to provide 256 channels of audio on and off. So it's a very large-scale system that, from an operational point of view, works in the same way. We're utilising all of the same benefits that we have within the Dante ecosystem that we have on the ground, and we've carried them into the cloud on the same platform.
Definitely get to that.
Nothing to add.
I think because there is, when we talk about cloud, I think people still think like they have 2019 or sort of pre-COVID times. I think it still kind of pops into people's heads, and things have evolved. First of all, because of COVID, we were sort of pushed forward that timeline and some of these technologies, but that there's been a lot of practical on the ground experience that people have developed even over just the past couple of years.
Yeah, I think the COVID forced the development of remote production, and remote production can mean so many different things. There are many models, and the cloud can fit into one of those models. Basically, it's one way of doing it. There are times when cloud processing will be right. There are times when you will need audio processing on the ground where presenters are for very low latency feeds. It all depends on the kind of production you're doing, where people are located. But everything that happened over the past 5 years has really forced the development in a useful way, I think, and it's all building on the building blocks that were already there. For SSL, we already had a distributed IP-based system, and we've added to this with more software-based, whether it's the processing or the control. We've got more software options to allow people to do a greater range of things over in all of these different models, whether people are using cloud processing, whether they're deploying processing to a venue. We support all of those approaches.
And that, I think, is, I guess that's a real, where a lot of the questions come in, is that it's not just on-prem or cloud, we're all going to the cloud, it's cloud all the time, or that you're talking about being smart about putting these different pieces together, and kind of how you do that is where, I guess, skill comes in, and really experience will start to come in.
I think there is no one size fits all. So it really depends on what your workflow looks like and what you need. Cloud in itself have this concept of elasticity, so you can scale up as much as you can, scale down as much as you can, and it can happen really, really fast in a minute or two, or even less. So it really depends on what it is your workflow looking like. You might have a specific live production where, as Berny said, you need very, very low latency for the talent and for the operators, or you have room for something more. Then you can really move to cloud. So it's really depending on your specific workflow. That's what I think.
Questions? You guys know everything there is to know about cloud production. This is amazing. You know everything. You sure? Nothing? No questions at all? But do you know how much? Oh, amazing. Okay, yes. Cloud. So is your question is like, if you're doing something in the cloud, like intercontinentally, is that harder or more expensive? Like, if I'm, is there any reason I can't do exactly the same thing
you
here?
go ahead first.
I think
versus.
Cost has to be a factor in all of these projects. You have to, again, think about what you're doing and decide whether it is the right approach for a given production. When it comes to cloud, the cost model is very different. One of the big differences is that there's a big move from things being capital expenditure up front, turning into operating expenditure. So you pay as you use it. It gives you much more flexibility. It's not to say it's all free. There is still a model there. But the other thing is potentially coming down to being smart about where your data is going into or out of the cloud. And again, if you're doing in some of the distributed remote productions that we have done, we might have a venue where you are capturing video and audio. Those signals are being transported to the cloud. You then have all of your processing in the same place in the cloud, so that the data within that, the costs there are very low. From an audio perspective, you don't need to bring all of those individual audio feeds back to the ground. The only thing the operator needs is one, maybe stereo or 5.1 feed for them to monitor what they are doing. So I think a number of broadcasters have shown that there are a number of financial benefits to the model. But again, there is, a bit like Ahmed said earlier, there is no one-size-fits-all answer, and it depends on the application.
Just to add to this point, I think the consideration is really bringing the ingest point to cloud. I think that's where the most cost will be. And again, it's infrastructure as a subscription, right? So it's the cost is not facilities, is not capex, as you said. It's pay as you go, if you like. So it depends really on what kind of workflow you're trying to do from here in the UK to APAC to Japan to Australia. But I think from a macro view, it's definitely lower. In the grand scheme of things, it's definitely lower because at the end of the day, it's a subscription model and not a buy and hold model. It's a very different approach.
So you can sort of say, on the whole, if I'm doing productions in the cloud versus buying stuff and keeping it on-prem, my costs are probably going to be lower over time than in the cloud when I'm in the cloud.
Well, it's a virtual workload, right? I'm not buying an OB truck, putting a console inside, putting an immersive system inside. I'm pushing a script to an AWS or GCP environment, whatever the cloud provider is. I'm pushing a script. I don't know, an hour before my show, but I'm not spending so much time buying stuff, preparing the facility, worried about local regulations, permissions. It's much more flexible approach.
Yeah. I guess to take that question of like, if I'm doing something, there's an event in Australia, there's it's a football event, or there's a team or something that I'm covering here in the UK. And I'm like, we want to do a show about that, a live show here in the UK. And the guys in Australia are like, yeah, we can set something up for you. We'll do something in the cloud, and we'll do a cloud production, and you're kind of doing it all from. Is there doing cloud productions over those large distances? Is there, in principle, anything different from doing it if it's just down the road?
From an operator's point of view, not really different, because the audio operator will still sit and operate a bunch of faders, right? But the processing is migrated or is offloaded from being here on-prem with us in a physical facility to a virtual server somewhere. There are a few things to take into consideration when doing this live production in the cloud in those large distances. Just understanding what are the latency limitations, or what are the required latencies for the talent and the operators, and that will dictate what kind of design or approach you work with.
I think that's exactly right. And to go specifically into the audio mixing point of view, if you're doing something where you're doing an event across multiple continents, if you have feeds, audio and video feeds coming to your processing engine, the important thing to remember is that it doesn't necessarily matter how long they take to get there. As long as they're all synchronized, or you have a way of synchronizing them, it's fine if they take seconds to get there. And if you're talking about multiple continents, at the end of the day, speed of light, there is a minimum amount of time it's going to take for that data to get around the world. But what can matter is that if you're pushing up a fader, you want that control latency to be as small as possible. And with cloud production, so if you had your processing engine somewhere within, I'm really only talking the same continent, but if your control surface and your cloud-based engine are within the same continent, typically the latency will be so low that it feels instantaneous. That you don't notice the difference between a traditional system where you have a processing engine in the room next door. And the fact that the feeds have taken some time to get to you doesn't matter. Where that would matter is if you had talent at the venue who need some audio feeds in their ears, and that's where a small amount of local processing, which you can still control remotely, but having a small processing element on site allows that side to work as well.
Or I guess another example, if we're going to get some really cool talent that's going to be on the show in New York, and we want to bring them into it, and now we're talking about sort of multiple continents. So that is, I guess, something on the audio side that's something you could advise on, and I assume you have I don't know if you can say, yes, your latency will be 8.3 seconds, you can get it, but you can
measure it, and yes.
So you can actually tell people you're going to have this much latency, you're going to, beforehand.
Within a ballpark, yes, you can.
Yeah. That's good. Other questions? Oh, that's right, because I forgot you already know everything about cloud, don't you? Anything else that we haven't really jumped into that you wanted to kind of cover, or that you think is especially interesting?
Nothing comes to my head, but if you guys have any questions, we'll be around, of course.
Well, I guess the question I have then is kind of what's the future? Sort of, I guess individually, what's the future for you guys in the company, but also and Audinate as well, but also how do you see cloud production sort of evolving maybe in the next 5 years or so?
So one of the key things is that I wouldn't say we see it as a replacement for existing technology.
Yeah.
It's an addition. It's another way of doing things, which will be the right approach for some productions. It allows greater flexibility. It reduces the amount of capital expenditure people will need, so it opens up new ways of doing things, whether you're covering more events, whether you're looking to operate on a different business model. It's an extension into that world. There will still be places where it makes most sense to use dedicated equipment or to do some of this on premise. So using the same virtualized software-based technology, but running it in your own server in your facility. So I'd see that as something that will come in the midterm.
Yeah, so it doesn't all have to be on AWS. I mean, a cloud is just, servers that, what about?
I guess we see in the next few years more improvements on resiliency and failover techniques. There has been a lot of impressive work on this. Personalization, we've seen some impressive workflows on personalization for distribution and playouts. And video, of course. Video is still a little bit of a challenge, but hopefully that will improve in the next few years.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, guys.
Thank
They
you so
will be
much.
here if you have any questions.
Thank you.
And thank you very much for being with us.
Right. Thanks.